is that, we have focused a lot on what's happened to the Treasury Department. And I mentioned that we saw this also happen at the Department of Labor. But you and I have done other videos, and we've all seen other reports about what's gone on at USAID, what's gone on at the National Weather Service. There have been reports of similar things going on in other departments and agencies. And the information that is in the Treasury Department is probably the most comprehensive and the most sensitive, but it's not the only place that people's personal information is stored. What about the Social Security Administration? What about the Internal Revenue Service? What about, the list goes on and on. You could think of places that you would not want a bunch of recent high schoolers to be rummaging through and then turning this information over to other people like Elon Musk. And so I do think there is more to this story to learn, which is why these orders are at this point very preliminary, right? They are simply trying to sort of freeze the status quo while these cases proceed, both to determine ultimately the law, but also to flesh out a little bit more of the facts.
We are continuing to get reporting, though, that DOJ is continuing to go to different agencies. I believe yesterday's reporting showed that DOJ tried to get into the National Institute of Health. And so as these continue to go on, can we take a ruling like this one, and will it be easier for judges to extrapolate it into the rest of the bureaucracy? Will they be able to say in advance of DOJ now going into the Social Security Administration or the IRS that we can do a blanket hold on them being able to access this type of data? Or do we have to wait for them to try, and then only when there is standing can they actually bring suit?
Look, I think you've asked what is ultimately going to be the biggest question. Like the big question that everyone should be focused on right now is whether or not federal judges are going to stop assuming that there is good faith on the part of the government.
Yeah.
And because normally judges, when it comes to the federal government, they want to issue orders that are as narrow as possible. They don't want to get in the business of managing how the federal government does its business. And there is no better example of this, Brian, than the coverage you did around the original OMB order. Remember, there was this memo from OMB that's purported to freeze all grants and loans. And what happened? A judge blocked it. And then it turns out, well, they were reading that as only applying to certain states and only applying to certain agencies. Then another judge blocked it. And then they were still reading it to only apply in some circumstances. And it wasn't really till the third order, which was the second order from the first judge, that judge said, look, I mean anywhere, any government entity, and through any mechanism. I don't mean just a memo. I don't mean just an executive order. Like whatever game you're going to play, I'm trying to cover that. And the problem, as you are pointing out, is if you don't start with that, then you wind up with this game of cat and mouse. Right. And so the big question is what you asked, is are judges going to stop doing the one-off and just at the first step say, look, I know you're here on behalf of the Department of Treasury, or I know you're here on behalf of, plaintiffs involved in the Department of Treasury. And DOJ, I know you're here representing the Department of Treasury. But I'm here to tell you, DOJ, I am issuing an order that applies to the entire federal government. And nothing is to happen further anywhere until I sort this case out. And no, we have not seen that. It is still going one by one.
Mark, I want to dig deeper into the thought experiment here, and this might be especially cynical, but what happens in the event that the folks from DOJ just do it anyway? That they know that they have the protection of Trump, that there is no pushback from the legislative branch, that worst case scenario, they know that they have folks at the Supreme Court who are sympathetic to their cause, and whereas normally you would have these litigants who would say, okay, I would risk being held in contempt. It's not like you're going to be able to hold in contempt the federal government, the executive branch, Donald Trump. And so what happens if they just kind of disregard the orders that they're given?
Right. And look, to add one fact to it that you omitted is Donald Trump's pardon power, right?
Right.
I mean, right. You're sitting there and you're the, what's the guy, Big Balls? Was that the guy from the Doge guy?
Yeah, that's right.
right? You know, the recent
Yeah.
high school kid who's
Yeah, I think it's Big Ball 69-420, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what
right.
it is?
And you're sitting there being like, look, yeah, maybe I'll be in violation of a court order, but I can be pardoned, right? If it's criminal
Yeah.
contempt. I'm not saying that
Right.
that's what the guy is thinking, but that is the other piece of this, right? So you're asking a big question, which is what happens if they simply ignore the courts?
Yeah.
And I think that there are some protections against that people are, because I know there's a lot of concern about it. What happens if they simply ignore the courts? And there are lots of people who are concerned about this. I'm sure you get a lot of comments from viewers about that. I get a lot of emails at Democracy Docket about that. And the fact is that there are some guardrails there. Number one, the Department of Justice lawyers who are making these representations and have to report back to the judge, right? In each of these instances, the judges are saying, come back to my courtroom and give me the assurances that this has been done. And those lawyers face risk that is not really pardonable, right? And so that is a part of it. The second is that ultimately, if the courts get angry enough and they do contempt, they can do civil contempt as well as criminal contempt. Civil contempt is not purgeable through a pardon, and you could have the courts start to impose penalties on these individuals at scale. Now, that's not going to affect That's not going to affect Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk, you could find Elon Musk $1 million a day, and it still wouldn't, prevent him from doing stuff. But there is some pushback. But I want to pick up your larger point. The whole system of checks and balances in this country assume that each branch of government will do their job to check the other. And right now, the one that's missing is Congress. Republicans in Congress, they are the ones who could be dropping the hammer on the Trump administration. They could be saying, look, in March, you need us to appropriate money, otherwise your government shuts down. And if you do this, we are going to zero out the White House budget. We're going to zero out and prohibit any spending on anything relating to Doge. We're going to restore the funding into a new protected federal agency for AID. We are going to take the database at the Treasury Department and pass a specific law that guards it and, puts protection upon protection. But like Speaker Johnson's not doing any of that.
Right.
Like Speaker Johnson is like, I'm sorry, hello, Donald Trump, what would you like? Yes, we will do that. I'm sorry, what would you like me to defend that you do that is ridiculous? Absolutely, sir. And that's it.
Yeah. And I do think that I think that something that would be helpful on the Democratic side is for them to be overt and clear in the fact that we know Republicans are going to need Democratic votes to keep the government open, because already there are a number of Republicans who just want the government shut down. They don't want it to exist. And so inherently, if Mike Johnson is to pass this budget reconciliation bill, he's going to need to do it with Democrats. I would like to see Democrats come out and say right now that that all of this stops if Donald Trump keeps moving forward, and if the Mike Johnsons of the world refuse to hold him to account, refuse to jealously guard their own prerogative as the appropriators in the government. So hopefully we will see Democrats use some of the leverage, the small amount of leverage that we actually do have, to use that against the Republican colleagues. But I do want to bring this back and kind of reiterate the fact that right now, this with all the doom and gloom that could be happening, and I think it's important to talk about this stuff and not to get caught flat-footed if and when we're in a situation where any of this stuff comes to bear. But at least this is a good step right now in seeing that the Justice Department lawyers did agree to limit Doge's operatives' access to sensitive Treasury data. I think that's a step in the right direction, and I think it's worth calling out the wins when we do get them. With that said, I know another place that we'll be able to keep on top of all of this stuff as soon as it breaks is Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet you founded to focus on everything voting in elections, especially important not just because it's up-to-the-minute news as soon as this stuff breaks, but it is also an outlet that is moving forward without fear or favor, unlike so much of the legacy media today. So for folks who want to reward this kind of media, please make sure to subscribe to Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Taylor Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.